luckily, I was able to get my hands on a 3090 for MSRP. Very, very excited about that. So I think the big question everybody has when somebody says they bought a 3090 is, why? Why did you buy a 3090? And here's why. So a couple weeks ago, I released a review of that TV/monitor back there, which is the LG CX 48-inch television. It is a 4K 120 hertz OLED, really fast, really awesome panel. It's very color accurate. It's great for gaming and content creation. Now that TV does have a couple of demanding requirements of it. Of course, if you want to take full advantage of 4K 120, you need a GPU that can drive that sort of frame rates and resolution, but also it needs to have an HDMI 2.1 output. Now HDMI 2.1 is crazy. I think it can handle up to like 10K or something like that. You can do 8K 60 FPS, definitely 4K 120, all in 16-bit color, which is nuts. And that is only a 10-bit panel, but I should be pretty future-proof with HDMI 2.1 and this card for things like content creation if I decide to get a more kind of professional grade color monitor down the road. Anyways, this card, and I believe all of the RTX cards do have an HDMI 2.1 output that is capable of pushing all of that out technically through the port. It's just a matter of how powerful the GPU is, which brings me to how powerful the GPU is. So if you don't know what this is basically the latest and greatest and pretty much most high-end graphics card that NVIDIA makes right now. Now next year, it's probably going to be like 70% the speed of their next fastest card. And that's unfortunately just the game you play and how it goes with these super high-end cards. Now I'll get to my use case and any recommendations that I have for this in a second. But first I kind of want to go over a brief overview of this thing. It's huge. It is thick boy. We all know that. It's got fans on both the front and the back. And this would be the top part on, it would sit in most motherboards like this. So this is what you're going to see. This thing is, I think, very cool. I like the futuristic kind of more modern design that it has. I think it looks quite nice. That being said, outside of space requirements and any sort of computer case, I would definitely recommend measuring before you purchase one of these, if you can actually get your hands on one. The only notable change from a lot of the past generations of GPU is they went to a mini kind of 12-pin system, and that requires a dual 8-pin connector. It's kind of a pain in the butt. I'm not exactly sure why they chose to do this, but they did. So it does come with the adapter, notably, so you're good there, but just be expecting something a little bit different and a system that doesn't look as clean as it otherwise would, unfortunately. So I bought this thing to be basically 70% content creation and 30% gaming. And the 30% gaming is kind of negligible. This thing as a gaming value proposition is actually quite terrible. I think it's one of the worst dollar per frame rate cards on the market right now, even though of the cards available consistently, it's usually the very top slot of all graphics cards ever. So it's got impressive gaming performance, but considering the cost of this, which is like $1,500, and that in comparison versus something like 3080, which is like half the cost and like 10% less frames or something like that, it's not really worth it from a value perspective. But if you want the absolute pinnacle of what you can get, this is it. In terms of a single card performance, this is pretty much as good as you can get at this exact moment. And I hear a lot of you thinking in the back of your mind, well, if it's a terrible proposition for gaming, why would you buy it? And if you're buying it for gaming, I don't really think it's recommended unless you just have a lot of extra cash to throw around in like a gaming rig and the money is not that important to you. But when it comes to content creation, this thing is an entirely different beast. And since I make my living working off of programs like Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve and Photoshop, something like this is, I'm not gonna say invaluable, because lower end cards can definitely get the job done, but they don't get it done as quickly and as efficiently. So TLDR, I'm gonna echo a sentiment of Optimum Tech, who basically said that this is a great card, but it is not a good value, especially for gaming. It's really not. Something like this though, if you're in the world of professional video creation, it's, you know, if you're in that world, you probably already know how valuable a card like this can be. And in terms of video production costs, this can actually be one of the cheapest pieces of equipment you might own, depending on your production equipment. Okay, so this is going to be running on full everything, and I'll show you the settings I have. I'm running 4K right now. Oh, whoops, that's credits. I'm on full 4K right now. I'm on custom because I turned film grain and chromatic aberration off, but everything else is on the highest possible things, either high, ultra, or psycho. I do have DLSS set to performance because it almost doubles my frame rate versus non-performance. I'll get like 20 to 30 frames with non-DLSS, and I'll get like anywhere between 40 and 60 depending on the area with this 3090. And this game just looks incredible. One of the things I did want to draw attention to, which isn't regarding the fidelity of it, but the time of day that you go somewhere, you're going to have like drastically different experiences. So right now, this kind of city center here on the map is sort of dead. Like there's not really anybody here. And I do have the full crowds turned up. And man, just the visuals in this game are insane. Look at that. Man, it's crazy. Okay, so I'll wait a little bit and you'll just see like the amount of people is just insane. And the frame rate like dips like crazy. But yeah, like this is like E3 levels of stuff right here. This is definitely quite a lot of people. Very dense. They even have points in the game where it's even more dense than this, but this gets pretty dense in here. So if you go down to the street, it's a lot like this. In the city, a lot more. But I really wanted to show off the visuals, and the visuals are impressive during the day, but they are like far better during the nighttime. So right now I'm getting like 36 FPS going around here. So this is probably one of the more demanding areas that I'll run into. And it's kind of crazy that this game, and I've tested The Witcher, it's kind of crazy that this game, on the best settings, the best card that you can get right now won't run it at like a solid 60. Like it's crazy. And I do keep switching between a controller, a keyboard and mouse, controller for driving, keyboard and mouse for everything else, pretty much. But this game at night just is on another level. Now I actually prefer to play at slightly higher frame rates, so I'll knock the quality settings down. I'm willing to make that compromise, but in terms of like maxing out the potential visual impressiveness, this is very impressive. And as you can see, the world definitely feels like rich and inviting and full. Pretty much the dead of night is the only times when you're going to be running into like a lot less NPCs and not so much traffic. But in that sense, it does kind of feel more alive than it otherwise would because it's fluctuative, you know, it's not static. I do wish the driving mechanics were a lot better. I really enjoy driving games, and I've always had a problem with games like GTA, where the driving is just kind of abysmal. It's pretty boring. It's kind of flat, not very dynamic. So one of the things that really impressed me was the sound design of things like bars and like going into different rooms. You'll notice that it becomes like way bassier in here, but it's super directional. It's really awesome. And this isn't a particularly bassy song, but when I first came in here, one of the things that really stood out to me was, like, you hear that on the side? That's really hard to do, but it's hard to do really directional bass response that is that well implemented. But I mean, just look at that. Like, look at the depth, the detail and everything. It's just, it's so good. It's so well done visually. And it doesn't run terribly. Like I'll bump this down a little bit in terms of quality. Maybe we'll turn RTX off, for example, and see what that does. I know this cascading shadows really hurts resolution for some reason. So we'll turn that down a little bit and okay, so RTX off, I'm getting 90 FPS here. And this looks pretty good. I would play at this, no problem. I think this looks fine. I don't need RTX, it's nice. Visually, it's incredible, but it's not super desired. I'd rather have a smooth frame rate. in like the 70s to 90s range than anything like that. Then back in the city, we're getting like 70. So one of the things that I wanted to cover personally was how this performs in Premiere Pro, which is my editing software of choice. Yes, DaVinci runs a little bit smoother for most computers. And if you're on a lower end computer, you should probably definitely be running DaVinci. But I was curious how this handled GH5 footage. So I have a project that I did for Woo Audio. The project size is about 52 gigabytes of footage. So all of this that I'm going to be working with in Premiere Pro is going to be 52 gigs of footage, which isn't actually that much in terms of camera footage. It's a lot more than like consumer grade cameras, but professional grade cameras, it's actually not that much for an hour's worth of footage. But this is like on the highest possible codecs, highest bit rate, the least amount of compression on the GH5. And I was curious how this handles this footage because it's quite substantial. One of the things though is that it's not just substantial, it is also really, really inefficient. So I was curious about how well the 3090 would basically handle it. And it handles it really, really well. The general timeline performance is just insane. Like this is 52 gigs of footage off of USB-C from an SSD, and it's just playing it in full resolution, mind you. I'm not even having to dip down to a quarter or an eighth or anything on a highly inefficient codec. This is just extremely impressive. And this right here is what I paid for. This is why the $1,500 is worth it, is because I don't have to, like, especially when you're working on a actual professional paid job. If you have a lot of dropped frames, you can actually miss things like camera shake, and you'll be delivering a not so professional looking final product to your customer. And to certain customers, certain customers are going to want, they want some feedback. They want to be able to go back and forth with like, hey, move this project to this project. But if you get a sticky customer, which Woo Audio is definitely not like that, they were very, very enjoyable to work with. But if you do get a customer who's a little bit picky, delivering the best project you can is very important, and it can actually make or break deals. So drop frames in the beginning. I've had YouTube videos where like a set of B-roll or something didn't turn out perfectly because I missed like camera jitter or shake or something. So also when you apply, like this scene is a little bland, mostly because of the lighting. So if I apply like a decent, let's just apply a quick color grade to it, nothing really substantial. I want these things to pop a little bit more. So I'm going to accentuate the blues and probably the reds here a little bit, give it a decent bit of a color grade. And maybe just brighten this up just a hair so that it really kind of pops. And then this will probably play back, I'm assuming, probably pretty smooth. Oh, actually, I did accentuate the blues, so let's kind of white balance this a little bit better. Okay, now once it's all color graded, when I play this back, it'll probably drop a couple of frames. I'm guessing probably under 5, but this is 60 FPS, full 4K, full codec, in 4K on the editing program with a color grade, not an extensive one, but still. And it's probably gonna, if it does drop any frames, it's gonna be minuscule. No drop frames. We'll let it play for a second. Maybe when it switches to the next scene, it might drop a frame or two, but this is extraordinary. Like this is awesome. Okay, so on this one, we'll do a little bit more of a heavy color grade because it's a little bit dark. So I wanna bring the shadows up a little bit. And no, let's not drop the blacks at all. And we'll definitely bring the highlights up a hair. And let's just say I want to do a hue versus hue adjustment where I turn these blues a little bit more towards green to create more of a traditional teal and orange setup. And let's just say that these reds are, I actually really like them, but just for the sake of example, let's turn these oranges into pinks. Okay, so a fairly decent color grade. On the footage is not an adjustment layer, so it's actually kind of baked into the image right now. And it dropped a frame, but I'm probably assuming that it probably dropped. And look at that. I mean, that looks awesome. Like that looks great. It's a little grainy because I'm pushing the codec a little far, but that's no result. And it dropped 6 frames in that entire thing after hue adjustments, and then no drop frames this time. And the performance is just exquisite. So ultimately, it's this sort of performance that people purchasing, this is my opinion, but people who are purchasing a 3090 should be purchasing it for professional applications. If you're gaming, I mean, it's your money, obviously, so, you can do with it whatever you want, but I wouldn't advise it for gaming. Like the 3080 is more than enough for gaming. It's barely behind the 3090, but it's this right here, that 24 gigabytes of VRAM that absolutely stomps in editing programs, especially for video or, After Effects, things of that nature.